Again, thank you for coming all the way out here. Thank you, everybody who's just coming in. This is literally the last conference room in all of Adobe Max, so I really appreciate you making the long walk and being here. And this is a great room because it's not separated by a thin curtain, so you'll actually be able to hear everything that we talk about. Yes. So my name is Jerome Silverman, but as it says here, it's Jerry. I want to put your minds at ease that it's great to take notes or take pictures of the screen as you, that's how some people can remember the things that they go over. We're gonna be covering a lot of material in this session, and so I just wanna put your mind at ease that this URL down at the bottom, which I will pull up again at the very end as you leave, that URL contains, it's a link to a PDF that has every single screenshot of everything that I'm going to show, like every single last screenshot. It's like 800 pages, and it's not full of text, it's full of screenshots. So that'll be valuable to you, you know, as a means of remembering what we went over. And of course, you can get me at Jerome Silverman on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook and all the socials. But you know, I bring this picture up because it kind of represents the beginnings of what are probably my creativity, since this is the creativity conference. You know, being a little kid, being inspired by anything and everything that you see, including awesome biking and BMX. That was probably my first love. And probably one of the greatest well springs of inspiration in my life came from this lady. Her name was Rita Rosen. She passed away a couple of years ago, and she was my grandmother, and this session is dedicated to her, and you'll see that she comes up as a character in my story several times. So what I do for Adobe, right, I've got Adobe in my title. Just to give you a little background on myself, I run these really fun, interesting, inspirational events inside of Adobe's enterprise customer base called Adobe Creative Jams. Does anybody here work for a large enterprise? Right? Oh, wow, awesome, great. Well, you know, some of your account people may be working behind the scenes to arrange an Adobe Creative Jam, like you might have seen on the show floor, where we bring people together to experiment with Adobe technology, to win prizes, and bring inspirational speakers. So feel free to come up and talk to me afterwards. I love what I do for Adobe. I'm a huge Adobe evangelist and advocate. And of course, I've got, you know, college pedigrees and, you know, certifications. So I have been kind of through the mill and have worked at Adobe long enough to rack up all of those, kind of that knowledge. And so I consider it a privilege to be here at Adobe Max talking to you guys. So thank you for the opportunity. And as you'll see throughout my story, I've kind of had to be reflexive about why storytelling is such an important skill. Since I do go all across the country and you know, kind of telling the story of Adobe and the Creative Cloud to everybody, I have to think about storytelling a lot, right? What makes it in, what doesn't make the cut, and kind of what the most important skills are. And so, you know, this is actually an image of my uncle, who's down here in the audience right here, the bald guy, and reading a story to two of my daughters. I have three. And you know, I think we learn storytelling at an early age through mimicry. People tell stories to us, and we learn it kind of very naturally. So we know when we're watching a TV show or a movie, when the storytelling's bad, we can't necessarily put our finger on why it's bad, but we just know. Our guts tell us this is bad storytelling. And so I have an answer to why storytelling is such an important skill through this wonderful example, which some of you may recognize.
Foreman presents You Be the Judge.
Can you guess who has a hair replacement here? I'm Cy Sperling, president of Hair Club for Men. And we'll leave these men on screen where I tell you that most men and women think they could spot a hair replacement a mile away. But I'm here to tell you that what they could spot is a bad hair replacement. Really good ones are virtually undetectable,
I could
even
never
as
tell.
close up as this.
Oh my God.
It's now possible for any man to solve his thinning hair problem undetectably. Just call our toll-free number now, and I'll send you our updated booklet that honestly discusses all the hair replacement methods, from hair weaves to transplants to minoxidil. Then you be the judge about what's best for you. Speaking of judging, What's your guess on our 4 men?
Anyone have a guess who here has had a hair replacement of the 4 men? All 4? Are you sure? You don't want to change your answer. Anybody else?
The answer is all 4
Oh my
have Hair Club's
God.
strand-by-strand hair replacement system.
I've never.
And I should know, because I'm not only the Hair Club president, but I'm also a client.
Who said all 5? Classic, right? So Cy Sperling of the Hair Club for Men, his story has linked his heart to my heart, right? Stories link people's hearts and bald heads to one another in a very powerful way. We learned his story. He had a problem, he had to solve it. He had to look through every possible solution, right? He goes through all of the ones that are not as good as his. And you can see the suffering, right? He's really sincere. Like he actually had to suffer a little bit for this. And I feel his pain and the joy in his solution, even though I've not obviously employed it myself. But when that happens, his idea is more readily manifested as reality, right? I feel his entire reality through his storytelling. And that's very important in business. It's important in interpersonal communications. It's important in all aspects of life. And parenting, being a parent is part of my experience, and telling stories is very important. So has anybody ever seen Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog? Can I see a show of hands, right? Oh, wow, only a few, right? I mean, Neil Patrick Harris, America's sweetheart for, a few years. He stars, winding it back, there was a writer's strike in Los Angeles in 2008, right? Where this is pre-YouTube, pre-Netflix, pre-Hulu, and the writers walked off the job in Hollywood, but the creator of Buffy and Angel and Firefly and the director of Marvel's Avengers, right, Joss Whedon, he took a bunch of his writers and said, I've got a great idea. We're not going to go to Fox or any of the networks. We're going to make it ourselves with our own money, and we're going to distribute it on this brand new medium distribution platform called the internet, right? And so they wrote this really compelling, funny, poignant musical comedy about an evil supervillain who is really trying to ascend the upper echelons of supervillainry. And he thinks he can do it by starting a video blog telling everybody how he's going to do it, right? Which, if you're an evil supervillain, that's like the last thing you do is tell everybody what you're going to do, right? You don't lay bare your devices in front of the cops, which winds up happening. So it was very successful. It broke all the internet streaming records. It was really one of the pioneers of storytelling, video storytelling online. It was so successful that, of course, they made a DVD and a Blu-ray. And being super creative people that they were, in addition to the normal commentary track where they bring all the actors back together into a studio wearing headphones and talking about, oh, wasn't that great when we shot that scene? Or, oh, you had Chinese for lunch and that didn't agree with you, but you had to cover it up by, right? Like all the random memorabilia. They also created a second commentary track that was called Commentary the Musical. And it was a completely separate musical, like Broadway musical soundtrack that was overlaid on top of the original visual program. So you're watching the movie and you're getting a Broadway musical commentary track playing underneath it, talking about how they made it. And it's just hilarious and brilliant, and but it really speaks to this culture that we've arrived at with storytelling that is picking apart every single last little detail of how something was made, right? The story in and of itself of Dr. Horrible and his blog, it isn't even enough. Like, we need to know what Neil Patrick Harris ate for lunch on that particular day, right? We crave those details. And the creator, actually, Joss Whedon, he laments that in one of the songs in this commentary track about how, the creator's heart, the storyteller's heart is broken by the endless loads of making-ofs and mobisodes, the buy-ins, sequels, games and codes that the audience buys. And the narrative dies stretched and torn, right? That's the quote from the song. And, the narrative is picked apart to death. And The story of telling the story is just a de facto part of storytelling these days. And so I want to tell you the story of how I got to be up on the stage telling my story at Adobe Max. It starts with this email that I got in the fall of 2016 from the Contemporary Jewish Museum of San Francisco, inviting me and my 11-year-old daughter at the time to participate in this cool program where children ages 11 to 15 and their mom or dad create and go to seminars about family history, interviewing, and art making, and you could potentially win a trip to Israel if you do it good enough, right? And I was like, yes, I have a daughter. Yes, I like art. Yes, I like free trips. Let's do this. And so I showed up at the San Francisco Contemporary Art Museum with my 11-year-old daughter. That's her. Her name is Naomi. And we started doing family research, and we discovered that Naomi is actually a fifth-generation American, hearkening back to this guy in the upper left, or upper right, Rudolf Schatz, who emigrated to America from what is now Latvia in the early 1900s, escaping all kinds of crazy pogroms and bad stuff that was happening for the Jews of Latvia. And he opened up he was once a metal worker, but he opened up a tobacconist and confectioner wholesaler enterprise in Philadelphia, in kind of the Jewish marketplace of Philadelphia. He goes through the Depression, the wholesale store crashes, his son takes over the business and turns it into a retail store. It's a real, American success story, and it's lovely. And so my daughter and I looked at Schatz, right, this guy who had come all this way. We decided to make, for our project, a box of Schatz's candy, right? And the concept you'll come to understand is all around telling the story through this interface metaphor, right? And it's called Drek a Mix. If anybody knows Yiddish, Drek is, we'll see what Drek means. But we went through, we wanted to make a digital project because I'm not only the president of Adobe, I'm also a client. And so we wanted to do something that was within my wheelhouse, and that also I could teach her some skills that would assist her digital literacy. So we made an interactive fixed layout EPUB document. Does anybody know what this is, or has anyone made that in Adobe InDesign before? A fixed layout EPUB document, kind of, sort of, right? So an EPUB is basically an ebook. It's like what you read on your Kindle. But a fixed layout one looks exactly the way that you design it, right? Which is kind of a nice consideration if you have something that's graphic and interactive, right? A regular ebook, you change the orientation of the device and the text reflows, right? This does not reflow. I set it up in landscape mode with that graphic, and that's how it's going to look on the reading device. So we made an EPUB. We also wanted to make a companion website for somebody who did not have an iPad, so that they could watch the videos that we produced and access the content. So we made that with Adobe Spark Page. And we also took the videos that we made, which I'll tell you about, and just loaded them into a YouTube playlist so that it was even more easily accessible. And so with the iPad, we bought kind of a cheap kiosk enclosure that you might find in a gallery or a lobby of an office. We put the iPad together, we put the EPUB in there. And so I want to show you what the interface looks like, because part of our exercise today is going to be breaking down the assets that we built and seeing how to do something like this. So I just come into iBooks, and I'm just going to open up the ebook in here really quickly. Sound guy in the back, I hope this isn't too loud, and you'll see what it looks like.
Welcome to Schatz's Dreckamix. Philly-made sweets since 1930. Tap the ribbon to open the box and enjoy.
Okay, so tap the ribbon to open the box, she says, right? So those little glowing ribbon there. So I go ahead and click on that.
Pick a chocolate below to watch a story. You can tap with your finger or click with your mouse.
Okay.
The map above shows which chocolate goes with each story.
So do you see how the buttons are kind of like glowing and pulsating,
Play all on
undulating?
the right-hand side.
Right?
To see how he made
So
this project, Choose credits on the left-hand
So I'll
side.
show you the introduction first to give you an orientation.
My name is Naomi Silverman. I'm 11 years old. I'm making this project with the help of my father and many other members of my family as a tribute to my great-grandmother, Rita Rosen, who is one of our favorite people in the whole world. I was Rita's very first great-grandchild, and I was very lucky to have her in my life during my early childhood. She always had lots of sweets at her house, and we would also go out to get them sometimes. One of my very favorite things in the whole world is candy. And I recently learned that Grandma Rita grew up in a candy store in Philadelphia in the 1930s. I also love being Jewish and doing all kinds of Jewish things. For this project, I wanted to learn about Grandma's history. What was her candy store like? What did she do in it? How did her family get into that business? Also, what was her family's Jewish life like? Did they have any interesting traditions or stories? To find out, I interviewed her nephew Bruce Schatz, her niece Robin Schatz, and read a family book made by her niece Rebecca Schatz of blessed memory. I hope you find the stories sweet.
Yay. Right? So now, once you come out, since this is a kiosk, you get a little message.
Touch the X to choose another candy, or touch the forward or back
You get a
buttons
nice
to
little
go to the next or
hovering
previous story.
X, right?
Pick a chocolate below to
So I'm gonna
watch a
do
story.
One more short one.
Henry and Gertie's store was a general store, not a big supermarket and not a convenience store. The family lived upstairs from the store. The kids, Bert, Rita, and Joe, would come downstairs after school and help out with the store. They sold two types of candy in the store. One kind was rock candy, or crystallized sugar. The other kind was chocolates. The rock candy came in big chunks. A typical chunk was the size of a basketball. Bert and Joe had the idea that they could chip off pieces and eat it. They had a running competition for who could chip the biggest piece off without their parents noticing. Rita would watch them doing it, and they'd have to bribe her with rock candy to keep her quiet. Once in a while, a shipment of chocolates would come in misshapen or crushed. Henry would melt down all of the confections, mixing the chocolate together with whatever fillings were inside. He would shape the mixture into cubes and resell them under the name Dreckamix. Dreckamix was our store's most popular candy. The customers would always ask for it. By the way, Drecka is a Yiddish word that means rubbish or trash.
Nice. Trash mix. Delicious. Yay, Philadelphia. Okay, so
Pick a chocolate below
one more
to watch
thing
a story.
that
You
gives
can
you a
tap
sense
with
of
your
why
finger or click with your
telling the
mouse.
story of telling the
The
story
map
was
above
really important.
shows which chocolate goes.
All right, telling the story.
This project was made as an entry into an international competition called My Family Story, which is hosted by the International School for Jewish Peoplehood Studies at Beit Hatfutzot, the Museum of the Jewish People. We participated through a series of workshops held at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco, California. My father and I worked together to interview relatives, do research, write scripts, collect and edit images, record audio and music, and assemble the final videos in the interactive ebook. We made the 11 videos using a simple, free storytelling app called Spark Video.
Ding.
We also visited a 104-year-old confectionery in San Jose, California, to do research and gather the visual materials that you see in this project.
All right, so as you can see, telling the story is very important, and here, at least for us, and this is the reason why. 20,000 families from 62 countries submit entries to this competition, unbeknownst to us when we started down this path at this one museum. It's part of this international competition, and out of those 20,000 submissions, they get winnowed down to a finalist list, and then the top 50 are selected to go into this international exhibition in Tel Aviv every June, right, at this Museum of Jewish Peoplehood, right? So, I wouldn't be standing here if our project hadn't been selected as one of the top 50 and they flew us over, right? So we we set our goal and we got it. And this is a picture of what it looks like, the annual exhibition in Tel Aviv, with my daughter set up with some of these really amazing stories, like these family stories, dating back much even further than ours, right? I thought the 1890s was far back, but some of these, went back centuries. And the judges committee was, determining the, first, second, and place. And so not only did we get flown all the way across the world, but we also took home first place. Thank you. And that was, after that I was like, I've got to do an Adobe Max session on this, to kind of drive home some of the lessons that we learned, right? It's been kind of a very conflicted time in the world, and so for us to bring some positivity and a touching, heartwarming story into the popular press and into the tech press was really wonderful for us. It was really special, to be able to contribute to some of the good stories out there in the world. And StoryCorps, which many of you might listen to, right? It's a program that NPR started a while ago, but they catalog the world's stories, and they kind of got wind of our story, and made us a part of the Great Thanksgiving Listen, which is a project. If you're an educator, you can go onto Adobe's Education Exchange and download a packet to kind of get your students involved in telling their family story. So it was just such an honor and a privilege to be included in the contest and kind of get all of this stuff. So now we're down to brass tacks of how we actually did it. And this is why you're at Adobe Max. I know you've been in a lot of technical sessions, probably, I imagine. And so this one, even though you might not think so, is going to also be somewhat technical, because we're going to talk about in the next 50 minutes how Photoshop, Lightroom, Premiere Pro, Media Encoder, InDesign, Stock, Acrobat, Creative Cloud Assets, Illustrator, Spark Page, Spark Video, Typekit, now Adobe Fonts, Adobe Audition, Creative Cloud Libraries, and Creative Cloud Market all came together for this multimedia project, right? And if you are only a Photoshop user, if you're only an InDesign user, if you're only a Premiere user, right? My hope for the end of this session and for you downloading the assets from this project is just to try one more thing, right? Go one step out of your comfort zone with any or all of these, right? So the research that we did for this project is actually the way I want to start off talking about the technical execution. We actually used, ironically enough, the StoryCorps methodology for interviewing, which is very simple and basic. You get your interview subject in a room and you ask them some warm-up questions, what's your name, give us some dates and places that you're from and your family is from, and then tell us a story, right? Nothing more complicated than opening it up to see what their story is going to be, and then just asking details on it, and then what happened, why, right? And we did this with a bunch of our relatives, but we were also super duper fortunate. My grandmother had just passed away when we started working on this story, working on this project. And as you know, when our loved ones pass away, they leave behind a lot of artifacts, photos, and physical things. One of the things that we kind of started looking at was a family book made by our relative, our cousin. And luckily for us, she had taken the family book that she had meticulously gathered of all the family photos from every era and scanned it into a 71-page PDF, thereby saving me the laborious, let's face it, like, who is going to take that family book and scan it? Like, you don't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. I wouldn't have done it, frankly, if she hadn't done it. So we were so lucky. But I needed a way to make that PDF really useful, and so that's the first stop on our journey is Acrobat, making that scanned PDF useful so that I could reuse the content that was important but not lose myself in the process that we were trying to do, right? So here's that PDF, looks like that. And very simply, if you've never used Adobe Acrobat in any deep way, editing a PDF in Acrobat has become basically my go-to for everything. And that pink button, once you click it, will automatically go through the entire page and convert that page to editable text and images so that the text inside of that blue bounding box over there, you can just select it and copy it, right? It was not PDF text before, it was a bitmap, and now it's been OCR'd. So that's super useful, but even more useful in a page with so many, or in a document with so many images, is that it will detect the image and you can right-click on that image and say edit using Photoshop or whatever, or Microsoft Paint, if that's what you want to edit it with. And it'll launch that application and pre-crop everything, right? So useful and so quick when you're working at scale with that many images. But if there's vector content in that PDF, you can also select that vector while you're in the editing mode and edit that using Illustrator, and it'll pop Illustrator open and show you also, like, hey, that's a vector object, right? You can, if it comes in this huge artboard, you can use the artboard tool to just fit the artboard to the art, right? That's a nice little tip. And then you see, right, any of those vector objects that are embedded in that PDF come through in Illustrator, and you can use it in any of your projects, right? It's a real vector art. So again, not to oversell Acrobat, but editing PDFs and using optical character recognition and having that edit in functionality, helped us be so productive with our documents, and Naomi really loved that we could turn bitmaps into text. Right? But once we extracted all those images, I mean, there were hundreds of images, we needed a way to organize them. Of course, we were doing this before Lightroom became this mobile platform in your pocket. But I will show you how we used that platform as we kept going. So we were using Lightroom Classic at the time. We also did basic composition and image editing because, again, at a project of this scale, it's not only good to be organized, but the images actually have to look kind of good, right, in order to sell the concept. And then outputting, how do you output those images, or how do you sync them up with a cloud service that's going to be useful to you, right? So they're in Lightroom Classic. As you might notice, in my entire family catalog, I've got now I have almost 50,000 images. And getting to those 60 or 70 images that you want out of 40,000, it's like finding a needle in a haystack, right? So I use three, and again, this is what I taught Naomi, right? There's three ways to go about picking the things that you want, right? Flagging, which is very easy. You use the P key, and you just pick the ones that you want. And if oops, I accidentally picked a wrong one, you hit the U key to unpick, right? It's kind of, I don't know which engineer thought of that keystroke, but anyway, you hit P to flag. Should be F to flag. Anyway. But flagging, and then once you go through really quickly and go through all your images, if you have 1,000 images, you can go through P, 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 right? And then you've got your first wave of collection. Then you've got stars. So then I go back through that collection again and say, that's a 4, that's a 5, that's a 3, that's, I don't know, that's a 5, right? And then you can go back through and find all of your picked 5-star images. Really fast way of getting them. And then if you need an even more granular way to choose those images, you can color code them as well, right? Very basic organizational skills, but I'm telling you, it made a huge difference because looking at those 5-star labeled red picked images, it comes down to a very small collection, right? And so another way that I'd like to stay organized is doing something called creating a smart collection. And this is something you can do in Bridge, you can do it in Lightroom, and the concept between a smart collection is basically doing a saved search on your system for any asset that's going to match the criteria that you set up. So I set up a saved search or a smart collection to look for any asset in my entire catalog that is flagged, that has greater or equal to 5 stars and is labeled red. And you can save that smart collection over there, but notice that smart collection, which I titled My Family Story, only has 67 images because those are the super duper selects, right? So again, staying organized and getting down to exactly the images that you want out of a field of 40,000 images, really great using those methods. And I do that all in what's called the library module. Making them look good, however, has to happen in the develop module, right? And so this photo was taken back in the era of film, right? So it was scanned in. It's got a lot of problems with it. And the basic adjustments that I make. I'm very basic when it comes to adjusting images. I don't like a lot of highfalutin filters or, I just like to mess around with, right? Even the auto button, when you click the auto button, it's just, I don't know, I like to do it by hand. I don't like Lightroom messing around with my controls. So if I want to make it, change the temperature to be more blue or more yellow, if I want to change the tint to more green or more pink, or cyan, or magenta rather, right? If I want the clarity, if I want to give it that soft, right? This is grandma, like I have a happy memory about her. I like the clarity to be kind of down so it's fuzzy, don't make her look like a crunchy rock star, right? And then the vibrance, right? I like the vibrance algorithm because it saturates the image without being too biased toward any one set of colors. So I like that vibrance. And then when it comes to effects, like everybody likes putting that nice vignette, right? There's the post-crop vignette, so it'll keep that vignette even after I crop the image. It'll adjust the vignette to whatever aspect ratio I crop it to. I never ever, dear God, ever use a white vignette for any reason whatsoever, and I encourage you never to also, because it's just bad. But when you do have your dark vignette, I'm just kidding, you can do whatever you want. But the midpoint, right, you can adjust the midpoint, back it off, or like hone it in. You can feather that vignette, also not a look that I desire, or you can like super feather it or super tighten it. And then, cropping, we live in the world of Instagram, so understanding what an aspect ratio is and knowing that 1 by 1 is a square is just something that I think Adobe could work on, and it could just turn 1 by 1 into like the text square, so to make us our brains not work so hard. But I just give it 1 to 1, right? Crop it, you hit enter, and now I've got it. So I've done like a million things to this image by this point, right? To get it in the fashion that I want it. And if I look over here on the left-hand side on the history panel, you can see this is why I love adjusting images in Lightroom instead of Photoshop for these basic adjustments, because it maintains a history even after you close your session in Lightroom and go home for the day. Then you open it back up the next day, and that the entire history from import all the way to the last thing you did is preserved, and you can walk it through 1 by 1. And I really love that and need it because I don't remember anything. And then once you have the image that you want, you can save all of those settings as a preset, right? The Adobe plus button, this plus button will come back again and again in this demo, but the plus button will allow you to create a new preset in Lightroom, which allows you to save every single little aspect of what you did, right? These are all just little adjustments that get saved into a preset that if I were to go back into my library, go back into my saved catalog, and want to apply that preset to an entire selection of images, I can do it in 1 click, and all those changes go through to that image. And so it's a really efficient way of working, especially, again, when you have a project that you're working at scale like the one that I have. Now, I didn't do a lot of exporting of images, right? That's something that a lot of people, when they work in Lightroom or some kind of image aggregation program or adjustment program, they're like, well, what am I going to get out of it? What's the format that I'm going to get out? And the truth is, you can set up presets for how you want the images to be exported, and save that until the day that you die. But what I really like is the syncing capability that Lightroom CC and Lightroom Classic have, right? You see that little transfer indicator there that lets you sync all of your assets up to Lightroom service, right, at lightroom.adobe.com, which is like a really robust service. And you'll see in just a second why I chose to do this instead of exporting out to the desktop. Because believe it or not, even against your own bias, you might think that it's faster to do it from the desktop, but I'm here to tell you, my friends, that uploading to this service not only gave us quick access to producing the videos and all the other content that we needed, but it also allowed me to share, as part of the kind of memorial process of mourning my grandmother, to share this album with all the people who we'd been interviewing, right? So you can share it, you can, as a Lightroom web gallery and stuff like that. So again, flag, stars, colors, and collections, right? Those are kind of just the very basics of Lightroom and just image organization in general. And using those very basic development effects and presets, as well as figuring out if you want to export, sync, or share, that's really important. So my daughter was 11 at the time, she's 13 now, but I needed a way for her to actually take ownership of this process, right? And sitting her down in front of Premiere Pro and being like, go at it, you got the pictures, just edit something, right? It's not gonna work. Like, she needed a little bit more structure and guidance than that. And that's what Adobe Spark Video provided for us. It was a really great educational tool, but also great for her to like jump in and start using herself. Because she has an iPad, so she could do it on my computer or on her iPad. That part right there is key. Easily leverage existing assets, right? Those existing assets that we just painstakingly extracted from that PDF, and exporting that to do some finer grade editorial, right? You might have noticed in those videos that were placed inside of the EPUB, they like transition out. They fade out to that nice purple crepe paper, right? And they fade back in, right? There's some nice transitions. That doesn't come directly out of Spark Video. You have to work with that a little bit. So you just go right on over to spark.adobe.com, right? I'm giving you the web browser experience that we, as an example of how we made one of our videos. And there's that plus button again, right? Anything you want to make a new thing or add something, right? It's pretty straightforward. It's a jolly candy-like blue button. And do you want to make a post-pager video? We're making a video, of course. Now, what's great about Adobe Spark is that after you name your project, it gives you a whole bunch of templates, right? So even if I were not guiding Naomi through this process, she could very easily pick one of these templates and start telling her story. But we decided, since we wanted this to be our own, to make up our own, right, over on the right-hand side. So we picked that kind of blank template to get started. And this is the very basic user interface that you come across, right? It's got a timeline down at the bottom. It's got the main screen, kind of like PowerPoint right there. You've got your layouts that you can choose from. You've got music you can choose from, and themes. And at the very beginning, it prompts you and says, hey, what do you want to put on your first slide, right? You think of it as PowerPoint, for those of you who live in PowerPoint like I do, from a corporate standpoint. And so I wanted to put in a photo. And putting in a photo is really easy because I had all of my photos, right? It brings up this interface saying, well, where would you like to get your photo from? I'm not going to get it from my desktop. I'm going to get it from that Lightroom service that I just uploaded those 67 photos to. Right, so easy. It's like all one workflow. PDF, Lightroom, Spark Video, zoom, like one right into the other, which is why it's called the Creative Cloud. So there's the images. There's the collection that I brought everything into, called My Family Story. This is the image that I choose, and I get it in there, and it looks perfect. I don't have to do anything. We're done. Video's completed, and the project wins. No, seriously though, right? We're into the iconography and the user interface of Adobe right now, so a plus adds a new project, whereas a pencil allows you to edit, right? So when I click that pencil, it gives me a little interface with a magnifying glass that lets me zoom that picture back out, right? Now she looks great, and I can come over to my layout, music, and themes, and pick what layout I want to do this, right? Because it'd be nice to have some text. As you might have noticed, we tried to caption this stuff at all. So over in the layout module, you notice that we can do a full screen of the image, we can do a split screen with text, you can have a caption kind of workflow. So when I choose the caption layout, it asks me for some text right off the bat, and I just type in, right, this is my grandma, right? It doesn't have to be more complicated. If I choose the split screen layout, then it's going to reformat in kind of a liquid layout display how that's going to look, right? So it looks pretty good. There's a whole bunch of preset themes. You can also build your own themes according to your own brand specs. That's kind of new this year in Adobe Spark, is you can upload your logo, and it will look at all the colors in that logo and give you basically a brand spec based on your logo and the colors in it, and then you can upload your own corporate font. Starbucks just did this. They're one of my customers, and they have their own font, right? It's called Sodo. And they uploaded their logo, got all their colors. They uploaded, Sodo Serif and Sodo Sans Serif, and they've got a whole bunch of cool Spark pages. So you can do that too. We didn't have time. We also didn't have really a brand per se. So we used one of these, themes here. For demo purposes, we'll use Flare, but of course, I would never use that. Even though I kind of did for the candy one. But But anyway, you can also upload your own music. There's a ton of royalty-free music that you can choose. A lot of that music that we chose for that background, those video backgrounds, were the royalty-free stuff, but in some instances, Naomi played the piano, and we recorded that to MP3 and normalized it and uploaded it to be the background music, which was nice, right? You can add it, you can change the volume, and stuff like that. There's some really nice royalty-free music. So then you can hit the record button or the microphone button to lay your voiceover on top of that music. And we just took my Apple earbuds, plugged it into the side of the laptop, sat Naomi down in a quiet office, and had her click the red button, and she just starts talking, and it starts recording her voice. If she screws up, which she's 11, it's going to happen. She's going to cough. She's going to giggle. She's going to mangle one of the words. You can just click over there and say remove narration and start over, right? So you can do as many takes as you want. It doesn't cost anything to try. And you can also lengthen, you can set a length of time for how long you want that slide to be on before it moves to the next slide, right? So if we set it for 7 seconds, then it's going to record her for 7 seconds and then cut her off, right? Again, you can add more slides. Think of it as interactive video PowerPoint or Keynote. You can add another one. And you might have noticed in that one where we're talking about the Candy and Schatz's Drecka mix that there were some cool icons, right? The basketball and the guy tipping off the parents. So that's really easy. You add an icon. There's a ton of royalty-free icons that you just search on, right? If I type in candy store, it's going to give me a bunch of these icons. And luckily enough, there's a candy store icon. Like, thank you very much, Adobe. And then you choose a split screen layout, add some text, and then you go about in a similar fashion until you're ready to share. Share button's really important because you can share it out to all your socials. For our purposes, though, what made it really useful was the fact that you could download your file as an MPEG-4, right? That's a very common video format that you can upload to YouTube directly or take it into Premiere for some more finer grade auditorial, which is what we're going to do next, right? So creating that video anywhere helped Naomi and I basically be wherever in my office or her room or wherever. Again, having Lightroom, the Lightroom assets there was really easy, and then that export was super useful. So here's the part that a lot of people who are in print design or web design are like, I would never open Premiere in my life, please God. And like, I totally get that, right? Like, Premiere is daunting to me, and I have an MFA in like interactive video art, right? So I still find it somewhat intimidating. I think Premiere Rush is going to be great, and I'm really looking forward to playing around with it because it will decrease my anxiety. But the thing I love about Premiere Pro, again, which is the thing I love about Lightroom and so many of the Adobe tools, is the capability of using presets, right? And so you'll see that in here. Importing the footage, creating a basic composition, using basic transitions and edits, and then getting it out both for the iPad and to the web simultaneously, reducing the overall amount of time Naomi and I have to sit in front of the computer was super great, right? So when you open Premiere and you start a new project and you name it, because be organized and don't just not name things, you'll be presented with this interface, right? And the one we're going to concentrate on is kind of down in the bottom left, which is the bin, which is where all your assets go. And so right-clicking in there and saying import, grabbing that Spark video that we exported, there it is. And like, I don't know, I'm not a video scientist. I don't know what bit rates and codecs and frame rates and aspect ratios and all that stuff are necessarily for video. So if I right-click on that asset and I just want to make a new sequence directly from that clip with all of the settings ready to go, I click that button and it drops it into the timeline for me, right? So I love that shortcut, and through a lot of different machinations, like applying default transitions, right, which allows the video to fade up very quickly using, does anybody know what the default transition is for Premiere? Any guesses? Fade, or I think I heard cross dissolve. All right, you all win the prize. Cross dissolve and or fade, right? So it's kind of the same thing, right? It looks like that. It's a very simple transition from one to the other. That's the basic, default transition. And just right-clicking on the edge of a piece of footage and adding it, right? That's what it looks like on the timeline. You can also unlink audio from the video if you want a particular piece of the video to lengthen or repeat, and then you can use the razor tool, right? So I would just reduce the size of this video and come over and use the razor tool and just basically slice off a little chunk, and then using the selection tool like you would in Photoshop, I would just grab that chunk and copy and paste it a bunch of times to fill out the video. It's one of those kind of wonky little tools, but it works great. And then applying that default transition down at the end. And so here's where the exporting the media, here's where the presets really come into focus for me, right? When you're exporting media, you want to not have to think about all those things that I talked about, bit rate, frame rate, or any of the technical stuff. You just want it to work. And so up here in the upper right-hand side of that export dialog is, once again, ye old preset, which saves my butt. And also, right, iPad. That's it. Like, great. I don't have to think about anything else. And YouTube, right? iPad and YouTube. That's where I know that I'm going, so I'll set it up like that. And luckily for me, right, Premiere Rush and Adobe Premiere Pro have this capability of publishing out to a file that might go into an ebook, but also directly to YouTube. You can log into YouTube from inside of it and put all of your tags, your description, your title of your clip and all that stuff, and it will publish it for you. And you can save even that as a preset. Everything can be saved as a preset. And when you say queue, it opens up, or you want to add that to the Adobe Media Encoder queue, this applet, or this kind of utility called Adobe Media Encoder opens up, drops your clip right into the queue there, and as you can see, if I want to apply the same exact settings, right, YouTube and iPad and upload to YouTube, to a whole big bunch of clips, then I can do that right here from inside of that queue. So fast forwarding a little bit, this is what the Premiere timeline looks like when I've got all 10 of my pieces edited with the transitions on it and ready to go. So over there in the bin, again, where we started, I can just control-click each one of those compositions, right-click and say Export Media, and then I get this great dialog that allows me to apply the My Family Story preset to exporting all of those at the same time. So this is how we did it, because we wanted to work and then finish and then export all at the same time, so we weren't exporting one after the other after the other. It's just like all at the same time so we can assemble our project in an organized fashion. If you turn on GPU acceleration, again, that's going to make it faster for you, but it's going to take up your laptop is going to sound like a 767 trying to take off, but it will go a lot faster, right? It will engage your fan. You click the play button, it starts chewing through the videos, and it spits them all out just like that, right? Super awesome, organized, fast, and efficient. So importing that footage, creating the composition, making the edits, and exporting. That's really all I use Premiere for. I think you'll be able to use Premiere Rush for this as well, and which has a little less of a kind of airplane cockpit look to it that Premiere does. So you might remember in that overview, I wanted to give Naomi not only some skills around video production and stuff like that, but also photography. So we took the DSLR, we bought a box of candy, we started taking pictures of it, and I realized that if we were going to make an actual interactive menu out of this, that it might be useful not only to have a picture of the candy inside of the box, but we might want to do something with that digitally afterwards. So I had her take all of the candy out of the box and just photograph the empty box, right? So to get that empty box as the background for the menu, right, we had to kind of use Photoshop to make it look a little bit nicer, right, to do all the adjustments on it. And then placing the candy in that box, of course, was done with Photoshop. Putting the buttons on it, those buttons actually came from Adobe Creative Cloud Market, right, because I don't want to have to draw a circle and a triangle if I don't have to. And making this Whitman sampler kind of menu we did with Adobe Fonts and Adobe Illustrator, as well as all of that other surrounding text as well. And then the ribbons, right, because we didn't feel like, it felt kind of empty without feeling like you had just opened that box with the ribbon, so we dropped the ribbons back in there. And I don't have time to take pictures of ribbon, to find a piece of ribbon and then like photograph it and composite it out, so we used Adobe Stock for that. And it made it really fast, right? So how many folks here are like Photoshop users, like hardcore, heavy, every day, like myself, right? So this is gonna be kind of an exercise in seeing how much better Photoshop is after Monday than it was when we made this, because almost everything that I'm about to show you is now like irrelevant because it's better now, because you don't have to do like 7 of the things. But it'll be nostalgic for the good old days when you had to suffer through doing these things. You know, all the adjustments and special effects, non-destructive editing is really important, but also doing layout and UI elements in Photoshop, right? So again, this is a previous version of Photoshop that we opened everything up in. Staying organized was really important for us. Again, I wanted to instill it in Naomi as a principle. And so, you know, labeling your layers and coloring them, and you know, unlocking layers, using the select and mask. This is now a button in Photoshop, right, that you click. But back in 2017, it was not a button. So you would come over to the quick select tool and drag it over, and then you'd be able to create you know, have a bunch of parameters that you can change around, like the radius, and decontaminate the color, the color fringe, you know, and all the colors, and then export it to a new layer with the layer mask. Now, what I did once I have that layer mask is I actually open up the Creative Cloud Libraries panel, and this is something that you can use hopefully in the enterprise, but also in your day-to-day. And I just drag from the Photoshop canvas directly over into the Creative Cloud Libraries because, you know, after I rename it, I can then use it to drag over onto the Photoshop canvas, resize it, use something called perspective warp, which we introduced a few years ago, to kind of lay to just kind of warp the entire thing into a perspective that I like, and then use this tool called puppet warp because I really want that candy to fill out, and that's just dropping pins. You know, and since this is an object coming from a Creative Cloud library, it is a smart object natively, so I'm working in a non-destructive manner, so I can turn those filters, the puppet and perspective warp, on and off. I can create what's called adjustment layers, which are just masks that have adjustments on them. Of course, I want those masks to clip to a particular layer, so I'll create a clipping mask and you know, then make those adjustments that only impact that layer right below where it is talking about. So I'll adjust the levels for only that, you know, the candy, and I do that non-destructively by creating that clipping mask, that clipping adjustment layer, and then, you know, doing the same thing for vibrance, right, making the candy more vibrant but leaving the background alone. Then, you know, you got into design because you fell in love with the drop shadow. Don't lie to me, I know. I did as well. The drop shadow was my everything. And, you know, it looks really complicated to add a drop shadow, but it's really just going in, clicking a checkbox, changing some parameters. And, you know, this is the kind of thing that Naomi loves to do, right? Like, whoa, right? This is the thing that hopefully will turn her into a designer one day. But also the ease of going into my Creative Cloud desktop app and searching in the UI category for a play button, right? We very easily just searched on the word play, found this button, downloaded it into my Creative Cloud library, and right, you can see it like processing and showing up, and I get a little growl notification saying, hey, your button's there. I drag it right over from the library onto the canvas, right? It looks pretty good, and then I can, you know, invert it, and you can see that, right, that's also a smart filter. And now, you know, you can go through the blend modes one by one. Now, it used to be a little harder to do that. I chose an overlay blend mode for this, and then I wanted to use ye olde bevel and emboss, one of the other reasons I fell in love with Photoshop, to make it look like the, you know, that arrow is actually embossed upon the surface of the candy, right? Super easy technique, but really effective. And then I take the you know, Alt key and drag it a bunch of times all over the candy. Looks pretty good, right? So again, that's your Photoshop tutorial for the day around selecting and masking, smart filters, the libraries and marketplace, and layer styles, right? So when it comes to that Whitman sampler map that we had up there, if you don't know what a bitmap is or don't know what a vector is, you really probably don't belong at Adobe Max. But you know, for those of you playing the home game, a bitmap is a photo, a vector is, you know, made out of math, right? And turning vectors turning bitmaps into vectors was important for this project. Also, having access to 15,000 fonts was really important, using those smart objects in Creative Cloud libraries also, right? So with my blank canvas, I would go into my libraries panel, or my blank artboard rather, and this is why I love libraries, because I can just drag straight from my library, scale it down, and then open up the tracing workspace in Illustrator up there, right? And go to my image trace panel and click preview. And boom, this is how it would look as a vector object if I did no other work. It's not really great because I want it to be a menu and not this look. So I would go in and reduce the threshold, right? Pixels darker than this threshold value are converted to black. So I would reduce the threshold value a lot to get some whiteness in there. And then there's a whole bunch of advanced toggles that you can do, like reducing the number of corners and reducing the number of paths and reducing the noise or increasing it to really kind of dial in exactly what you want it to look like. It's still not super duper perfect though. So what I did with this is I actually expanded it, and the expand button is going to turn it from a preview into an actual vector object that when you come in and say outline it, right? Like that's what the vector lines look like. This is the math, right? And I would just use ye old eraser tool to come in and erase the crud, right? You see it, it's like the before and the after, to really get it looking like the Whitman sampler menu that I want it to look like. Then I would grab the rounded rectangle tool and just make a simple rounded rectangle, come up and make it a 2-point rounded rectangle and expand it out. I'd add some text using the type tool. And here's what I love. I mean, I love so many things about Typekit and Adobe Fonts. But the thing that I love the most about its implementation inside of Illustrator is the fact that I can kind of walk through. So this is what you can do with blend modes now in Photoshop. And I think the Photoshop team looked at this and were like, oh, we should do this. We should do this, guys. Is that going to be hard? And the engineers were like, yeah. And like, I don't care. This is what we should do. But you can walk through. Like, notice I'm just hitting the down arrow key through all these different fonts, right? If I don't see any fonts that I want, I can just add it very simply through, it's going to say add for Adobe fonts, right? The branding will no longer be Adobe Typekit, which, fine, whatever, I like fonts. It is what it says it is. But what I hope they don't get rid of is this method of going through and finding the styles of fonts that you need, right? So if I know I want a serif, I want it to be a heading type of font, a heavy weight, kind of middle width, low X height, lots of contrast, standard, not all caps, and I want the default figure style to be kind of uniform, then it's going to go through and sort through those and find the one that I want really super quickly, right? Bodoni, I did a little research on that typeface, and it was like popular in the 1920s and 30s. So I was like, I nailed it first try. I just got extremely lucky. And then once you kind of click on that to do a little bit more research, you can type in your own copy, right? Like Schatz's, and see what it looks like in all the different weights, right? I happen to like extra bold as the weight that I wanted to use. So you click sync, and it syncs it directly up to your desktop, right? You find it in the Adobe Creative Cloud desktop tool as Bodoni, and it's synced. If you click Manage Fonts, then you can take fonts in and out of your queue. Now this thing right here is no longer relevant because you can now sync an unlimited number of fonts, right? It's like Emperor Palpatine, unlimited power. You can sync an unlimited number of fonts. But here's the thing that blows me away is that I like it, I sync it, and it just I didn't have to close Illustrator or close my file. It just pops into that queue right away. I love that. It's amazing. And it tells me that it's Typekit. I can come back up into the top of that menu and just click the little Typekit button, like apply Typekit filter, and it's only going to show me Typekit or Adobe Fonts, right? So I can know what those are going to look like. And then if I like this one, I want to use it over and over, I can just click the little star, which is, again, remember from Lightroom, right? We star things to show our preference. And then if I search on only the starred fonts, right? It's called Apply Favorite Filter. Then it's going to show me the two fonts that I've starred, right? One is Bodoni, the one that I just painstakingly looked for, and then Bickham Script is the one that the other 1920s or 30s font that I found lying around in Typekit, which was beautiful and it worked. So I kind of like, just massaged it a little bit more, added some numbers, added some text, grouped it all together, right? So you can select this whole thing, group, Command G, right? The graphic designer's best friend is the Command G button, or Command G key. Then open your libraries back up in Adobe Illustrator and drag that whole group into the libraries panel, or you can click the plus button to just add that graphic into the library. And now that's ready for me, after I name it, of course, to bring it back into Photoshop, drag it over into the Photoshop canvas, right? Place it exactly how I want, perspective warp it a little bit, add that overlay blend mode, and now it kind of looks like it was always there. Right? Oh, geez. Oh, please, come on. No. Thank you, but no. So anyway, that's the basic, tracing workspace with that live trace panel, which I love, the Adobe Fonts integration, and using smart objects from the library. Really super quickly, right? Again, I didn't have a ribbon. I didn't have time to look for a ribbon. There weren't any lying around Naomi's room. So we used the frictionless licensing of Adobe stock to go still, while we were in Photoshop, to search within that library panel, and all of a sudden, right, we're looking for photos. We just type in the word ribbon, and now if I like tear off the libraries panel and expand it, I can see every asset in the 130 million assets that are Adobe stock. I can even see the ones that I've licensed before because it's got this little badge that says, hey, that little blue checkbox, you licensed that before. You can get that without having to pay again, which is super convenient. So all I did was download it to that library. It loads in. I can double click it, use that same select and mask workflow to get it, add an adjustment layer to make it purple, add a drop shadow, right? I mean, it's all the same techniques that I just used to get that ribbon to be in there. So again, having that in-app search made it really easy to not have to jump out to the web browser to do any licensing. The integration with CC libraries means that I'm keeping all of my assets in one place, right? The candy and the map and the button and the ribbons are all in the same library, which is great. And the fact that it remembers which assets are licensed are great. Now, that EPUB, again, for those of you InDesign users, how many do I have? Right, so a lot. Okay, so you may or may not be aware of all the interactive media tools that are inside of InDesign, but creating timed animations, buttons, actions, and media, testing, exporting, and publishing, right? So it's really robust, and this comes from a legacy of InDesign having been able to create interactive documents for a long time. But we reached kind of this great moment where making an interactive EPUB is a thing that's really possible. And you see a lot of educational publishers doing this. You see a lot of entertainment publishers doing this. So I'm just going to show you really quickly how we went about doing it with the interactive media tools and the digital publishing tools in InDesign. So when we created our new experience, we didn't want it to be a print or a web, right? We knew it was going to be a mobile experience, so we went over and chose the iPad, landscape orientation, 1024-768, the kind of the typical, landscape. And then we used every designer's best friend, Command D, to place our content, right? Grab that Photoshop file, a layered Photoshop file, plop it right in InDesign, right? And InDesign, for those who are not typical users, it's got, the metaphor is pages, right? Because you're making a printed publication or ebook. There's layers, just like every other application, and there's links, right? These are all linked assets that go out to an actual asset, so that when you change, or for example, click the Edit Original Pencil, and you can change that original asset, and it will update in InDesign. So, the thing I wanted to change about this, I did a little polling from friends, and they said, you know what, you should fill in that triangle. Like no confectioner, I mean, I'm a confectioner's descendant, and I natively knew this already, but no confectioner would ever make that, would leave that triangle unfilled. They would fill it in and make it, kind of more, stable. So all I had to do was actually just double click on one of those triangle assets, and it opened the original SVG file in Illustrator. So all I had to do was go in, use the polygon tool, create a black fill, come in and save it. Oh, I'm having my alarm, so I have my 10-minute warning. Can you believe we've gotten so far in this short amount of time? Save that, and then once I save it, it refactors in the Creative Cloud library to be a filled triangle, and then I come back to Photoshop, and all of those triangles are filled. Again, that's why it was called the Creative Suite back in the day, and why it's called the Creative Cloud now, because of that, Adobe magic. And then when I save the Photoshop file, it updates automatically in InDesign, right? So again, going all the way across the cloud, very nice. But, if I want to create buttons in InDesign, I need to have an off state and an on state. So I turn the buttons off in Photoshop, and automatically InDesign senses that something's wrong. It's like, hey, you just changed that. Can you double click to update? And there, now it's updated. I duplicate, so this is like a little interactive media trick. Now that I've got that background without the buttons on it, I duplicate that layer, right? And then I relink it as a linked asset to another Photoshop file that has the buttons turned on, right? It's just kind of a little method for creating, masking. Let's call it masking, right? So that line is the frame line in InDesign. So as you can see, what we're looking at on the bottom half is the Photoshop file with the buttons turned on, and behind it is the Photoshop file with the buttons turned off. And so what I do with each frame is I'll take that guy and I'll just make one little frame out of the Photoshop file with the buttons turned on, and then I will duplicate that and drag it over so that in my layers panel I've got 10 identical pieces of candy, each one just covering it up. So it's a kind of a masterful little bit of masking that you have to do, right? Because remember, the menu that we had, those buttons were kind of like undulating, right? It's like one would turn on, and then the next would turn on, and then the next would turn on, and then the next would turn on. And you need that when you're in a kiosk in a museum, because somebody's going to walk up to it and be like, oh, what do I do? Right? And if you've got this nice kind of undulating buttons turning on and off, you're just like, oh, maybe I should touch a button because it's moving and glowing, right? So you have to lay this out in InDesign like this in order for them to get that experience, right? And that's how it's organized in the Layers panel. So if I go over to my digital publishing workspace, it's got all the panels: animation, timing, media, buttons, right? And the interactivity preview. So if I go into animation, because I really want to animate those buttons to do that glowing undulation, I would choose the fade in preset on one of the buttons that I have selected right now, which is all the way on the left. And I would say, give that a 1 second fade in. But if I want them all to fade in, I would select them all. So I'd go in the Layers panel, and I just hold down the Shift key and select them all. And then I would apply in the animation panel that fade into all of them. But what do you think is going to happen when I click fade into all of them? They're all going to fade in at the same time, right? Which is not something that I want. I need to stagger the timing a little bit, which is why the timing panel allows me to select them all and play them together, but then arrange a 0.5 second delay between when each animation starts happening. So when I apply that 0.5 second delay, the first one will start fading in, wait 0.5 seconds, the next one starts fading, then that one, then that one. And remember, we're fading in the image of a button over the top of an image where there is no button. It's the same Photoshop file, just with one with buttons turned on and one with buttons turned off, right? And so they're fading in. We want it to loop indefinitely because it's a kiosk. And we got this little button down here that says preview that opens up and renders this whole thing, kind of like back in the days with Flash. It would compile your Flash content. And then it allows you, right? You can see how those buttons are kind of undulating there, and I can test it. And now I use the ellipse frame tool to just create a new layer, right? You can see that the layer with the buttons. And I just create a whole bunch of buttons. And I have to use the buttons panel to tell tell the EPUB what to do when that button is clicked, right? So what do you do when a button is clicked on release or tap? You want it to go somewhere, right? You want it to go to a page that has a video on it, but I don't have any pages right now. There is no page 2. So I have to insert a page. I'm going to make a page 2. I'm going to put another graphic in there, and then I'm going to go and hit Command D to place not any other file than one of those video files that we made that we exported from Adobe Media Encoder from voice, from that whole system, right? So you can place that directly on top of anything in InDesign, right, which is great. And then you can have some controls, like what the poster frame is going to look like and what you want the controller to give you the capability of doing, like play, stop, seek, full volume, full screen, volume, caption, right, that kind of thing, right? So now that I have a second page, I can tell each button, right, for example, this button, I'm going to tell it to go back to the first page. The button over there on the right, I'm going to tell it to go to the next page. The button, over on the left will go to the previous page. So that's the programming. But remember the audio that we had in those menus, we need that audio to sound good. So Naomi and I used Adobe Audition, which is really simple. I mean, that's also somewhat complicated, but this is a waveform of her voice saying, welcome to Schatz's Drecamix. It's very easy to just select a little piece of audio and cut it, right? So you just go in and cut out the stuff that you don't need where there's no waveform. And then you can select it all and do what's called normalizing. And normalizing just makes the levels sound normal in your ears as opposed to far away, right? So you're normalizing that waveform to kind of the correct volume that you're used to. So you notice the waveform actually changes and it fills out the dynamic range, making it a lot more listenable. And there's other things you can do like noise reduction, but basically getting this out to an MP3 file is really easy because MP3 is the file format that InDesign accepts. So I can place that MP3 file directly in InDesign, and in the timing panel, I can have it start playing, right? So now that I've got my whole menu completely rigged up, I've got all my pages, all my videos, all my audio, all my programming and timing and all of that stuff, I go into File Export, and I can export that as this EPUB file, right? This fixed layout EPUB file, which is an EPUB 3. And I can give it some details. I can publish it online if I want to. That's part of the HTML experience. Give it some metadata so that it can be searchable. And then it's going to not only spit out that EPUB file that I just played for you, but it's going to publish it in this HTML experience. That once it's finished, you can view that document online in this online repository, and it plays back exactly as it would in your ebook document, right? So that's the publish online capability, right? Plays back identically. You can share it on all the socials, and you also get a little dashboard showing you how many people have seen it in what format, and you can also get to that dashboard directly from within InDesign, right? So with the few minutes that I have left, let me see. Oh, I actually only have 2 minutes left. Right, so InDesign, creating timed animations, creating buttons, actions, and media, testing, exporting, and publishing, right? So I have to skip over one thing, which is how we use Adobe Spark Page. But again, I want to encourage you to use Spark Page to tell your story as well. So just to give you a concept of what we use Spark Page to do, right? Again, that's creating little microsites to publicize your story. Again, using assets from basically anywhere, like Lightroom. Super easy publishing to tell the story of telling the story. So again, all of those things we were able to cover in 75 minutes. If you took anything, even one new thing away from any of the tools that you use every day, then I will have considered my life worthwhile, but also this class a success. And again, the basic message is, right, the reason stories are successful is because your heart is linked to theirs, right? If the story's not coming from the heart, people are going to know it. They're not going to know how they know it, but they'll know it. So make sure your story comes from the heart, even if it's business, especially in business, it has to come from the heart, right? Because that's really what stories are all about. And A lot of times, you got to tell, people are going to want to know, if they feel it's coming from the heart, they're going to want to know more. So you got to tell them how you came up with the story. Give them more, right? Pick it apart. And again, don't be afraid. Try something new, right? My daughter didn't know how to do any of this, and she was willing. I mean, she's a kid, so she's a little more courageous than myself as a grown-up. But don't be afraid. Try something new. So again, today's slides, if you didn't pick them up before, all of the walkthrough, everything that you need. If you want to check out me and my daughter's actual project and how it looks and how it runs, you want to download it, watch the videos, or anything like that, you can do that at that URL. But again, I just want to say thank you to you guys for listening to the story, for being here and being part of the story itself. I hope you took away something that was valuable to you. Thanks for coming all the way to the very end of Max. I hope Max was great for you, and hope to see you guys back again next year. So thank you again so much.